Easy vid. Awesomeness. Hello everybody, this is Chris Radke, broadcasting live from Chris Radke Studios in Lawrence, Kansas. Today I'm going to review the white paper you see in front of you, Implementation Tips from the Trenches by IQMS. This particular paper is about lessons learned and tips, etc. for successful implementation. Basically written for someone who's already chosen Enterprise IQ, which is their ERP platform. Overall, it seems like a pretty good paper. There's some cheesy language involved, like all that stuff on the front page. Makes it look like it was written by a bunch of ex-military guys talking about battle and front lines, etc. But it's still pretty good. It's written conversationally, easy to understand, not a lot of tech jargon. Alright, go ahead and move on to the next page there. There's not a lot of introductory material here. Because like I said before, it's designed for someone who's already chosen Enterprise IQ. And so they just sort of dive into, 5 big things that are important for a successful implementation. The first one is right there, building your team. They also talk about business process blueprinting, implementation method, setting a timeline, and the most common problem, which I'll leave you hanging, and I'll get to that later. But as far as building your team specifically, talk about it's important to have a diverse group of stakeholders from across an enterprise. That way, everybody gets a good say in what's going on. They also talk about what to do as far as whether it's worthwhile to travel your team back and forth if you have a company with more than one site. They talk about it's whether to have one or multiple. And that just really depends on the way your company's made up. The next area is business process blueprinting. You might recall this. We studied and we referred to it as process mapping, but it's the same thing. And they reiterated how important it is to know your processes. And just to make sure that you have them laid out before you do implementation. As you may recall, we're actually supposed to have done this before you select a vendor, which is what they say right there. But just in case that hadn't already been accomplished, it's important enough to mention again that you need to know your processes. Otherwise, when you're installing your ERP, things won't be installed correctly. The next area they talk about is implementation method, and they talk about phased and big bang, a little bit of both, which is better, and it really depends on the way your company is set up, but there's advantages to each. The next area they talk about is having a realistic timeline, and they kind of flesh out some of the major milestones along the way, but the bottom line is that you need to make sure that you understand, and all members understand, just how difficult this process can be, and what it takes to be successful. Making sure that you know how long things will take. If you remember from early in the course, it can take up to a year to do an implementation, or longer depending on the scale of your company and what type of ERP you choose. So it's just really important to understand how long it really takes to do this. And last but not least, the most common implementation problem, as you may have already guessed, there it is right there, time management. Same problem that plagues most companies, really. There's so many moving parts, and ERP implementation is such a complicated thing that doing it, you have to make sure you stay on task. It's good to have good planning, and then make sure people are executing and doing the things that they're supposed to do. Because if you don't, you end up with one of the many examples we looked at last week of an ERP failure. Overall, the article I thought was pretty good. It has good information. It's easily understandable, not too technical. And even though it's written for Enterprise IQ, it has information that's useful across the board, regardless of what ERP solution you choose. These are just good tips that can be used by pretty much anybody. That concludes my presentation.